Session 1. What is Pardes? A Pardes in everyday life is an orchard, as in a piece of land planted with fruit trees. In the realm of Torah, however, specifically on the level of Kabbalah, the word refers to an orchard of a different nature. It says in Shar HaGilgulim, Introduction 11, there are 4 levels of Torah interpretation. Their sign is the Hebrew word Pardes, and they are called Peshat, Remez, Derush, and Sod. By sign, he means mnemonic, a memory device comprised of 4 letters, Pei, Resh, Daled, and Samach, that when combined happen to form the word Pardes. Each letter, however, is also the first letter of a different word, each of which is the name of a different level of Torah learning. The best way to understand what each level means is through an example. The first verse of the Torah says, in the beginning, God made the heaven and the earth. The Peshat of anything is its simplest and most obvious explanation. In the case of this verse, it is that at the beginning of everything, God made the heaven and the earth. As a commentator Rashi points out, however, there is something about the Hebrew text that hints to another level of explanation. Rashi says, the Torah did not come to teach the sequence of creating, to say what came first. If it had come to teach this, it should have written at first, Barishonah, he created the heavens and the earth. For there is no reshis in the Torah that is not connected to the following word. This is what Rashi means. The verse quoted begins with the Hebrew word bereshis, which is translated as in the beginning. As Rashi points out, this word usually means in the beginning of something, such as of God's creating, which is not what the verse relates. The proper Hebrew word to convey the meaning of the verse as it is generally understood, explains Rashi, is the word barishona, which means at first. The fact that the Torah does not employ this word results in a remez, or a hint, to another level of interpretation, ba-reshis, which means for the sake of reshis. This would change the meaning of the verse to, for the sake of reshis, God made the heaven and the earth. Rashi then brings other verses to show how the Hebrew word reshis, or first, is another name for both Torah and the Jewish people. As a result, the verse, at least on the level of remez, can be interpreted to mean, for the sake of Torah and or the Jewish people, God made the heaven and the earth. This idea, as Rashi also notes, is in fact true. God did not randomly make creation, but created everything as a way for the Torah to be fulfilled, and for the nation that would fulfill it. It is this that justifies all of existence, as the Talmud states. Reish Lakish said, why is it written, and there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day? What is the reason for the additional hey? Reish Lakish's question arises because the Hebrew word for 6th in the verse begins with the letter hey, the definite article. Hey, shin, yud. The numbers of the previous 5 days' creation, however, are not preceded by the letter hey, and Reish Lakish reveals why. He says, this teaches that the Holy One, blessed is He, stipulated with the works of creation and said, if the Jewish people in the future accept the Torah, you will be able to continue to exist. If not, I will turn you back to null and void. The null and void to which Reish Lakish refers is mentioned in the 2nd verse of the Torah. It says, the land was null and void, and there was darkness upon the face of the deep. The Torah tells us that prior to the orderly world with which we are familiar, there was chaos. This was the starting point of creation, and according to Reish Lakish, God was prepared to make null and void the end point of creation if the Jewish people did not accept Torah when it was offered to them. The question is, how did Reish Lakish arrive at his conclusion? The letter He in Gematria, Torah numerology, corresponds to the number 5, an allusion to the 5 books of the Torah, Bereshis, Shemos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Devarim, or Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The number 6, Havashishi, exegetically alludes to the 6th day of Sivan in the year 2448, or 1313 BCE, before the Common Era, when the Jewish people were destined to accept Torah at Mount Sinai. Thus, for the sake of Torah and the nation destined to fulfill it, the world was created. The level of Derush, or exegesis, is more complicated. Whereas a hint can often be derived from something that is visible, such as a misspelled word or an extra letter, Derush may not be apparent on the surface and instead be based upon a tradition. For example, the word of the Torah, Bereshis, is spelled Beis, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Tav. It can, however, be broken into 2 parts in the middle, resulting in 2 words, bara and shis. Literally, he created 6. 6 what? There is a discussion about the way in which God made creation. One opinion says that he made all of creation at the first moment when he said, Bereshis, and only had to put each element into its intended place on its particular day of creation. The other opinion says that all of the elements of creation were not created at the first moment, but rather on their particular days. The interpretation of Bereshis seems to support the first opinion, that God made all aspects of creation at the first moment. In fact, not just all the elements of the first 6 days, but of the 6 millennia that followed. It says, this is the meaning of the word Bereshis, Barashis, that God created the 6 millennia. There is no hint in the verse to indicate this idea, especially since the word shis is the number 6 in Aramaic, not in Hebrew. The only way to authoritatively arrive at such a conclusion is to already have a tradition, a medrash perhaps, that shows how the verse can be a source for the idea. There are different methods for Derush, 13 according to the Sifra, and they are mentioned in the morning prayer service right before Pesukei de Zimra, or the introductory psalms. There are rules regarding when they can be applied and for what, but the main point is that such usage is usually based upon a long-standing Torah tradition that can be traced back to Moshe Rabbeinu. The final level of Pardes is Sod, or secret. This refers to the mystical level of Torah, otherwise known as Kabbalah. The word Kabbalah actually means received, because like the rest of the oral tradition, Sod is an area of Torah learning that has been passed down from generation to generation, going back to when Torah was first given. For some, Kabbalah is controversial. As mentioned, it is an area of Torah learning that belongs to Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral tradition meant to accompany and explain the written law. People tend to think, and often rightly so, that oral traditions are less reliable than written traditions. In addition, since Kabbalah, for a long period of time, was only known to a handful of Torah leaders and students, its seemingly sudden emergence onto the mainstream Torah scene 1,500 years after Mount Sinai was suspicious. It also does not help that Kabbalah contains many ideas that, at least on the surface, seem somewhat different from the more revealed areas of Torah learning. In response to this controversy, a great and well-known 16th century Kabbalist, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, otherwise known as the Ramak, wrote, "Now that the wisdom of the truth, another name for Kabbalah, has become revealed and made known among Jewish scholars, an inheritance for the assembly of Yaakov through Moshe Rabbeinu from God. Anyone who denies it or argues with it is a heretic, because it denies a portion of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. He removes himself from the faithful of the Jewish people, from the time that it became well known among the Jewish people, that is, from the time of the Ramban and onward, who lived between 1194 and 1270, there has not been a single Torah scholar from the wise of the Jewish people who has denied its validity. Previous to this time, it was hidden and revealed only to a few fitting people in each generation, as it is known in the responsa of the Gaonim, a period of time between 589 and 1038 CE. In the time of the Ramban, however, it became known among the Jewish people, and not a single scholar from all the wise of the Jewish people, from whose waters we drink when learning their commentaries on Talmud and legal decisions, have argued against it. There were basically two major turning points in the history of Kabbalah. The first occurred during the time of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, otherwise known as the Rashbi. It was the Rashbi, on the day of his death around 120 CE, who revealed the tradition of Kabbalah he had received from his teachers to 9 of his students. It was their manuscripts that were published as the Zohar in the 13th century. The second major turning point was the life of the Arizal, or Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. He lived in the 16th century, from 1534 to 1572, and explained the Zohar in ways that no one had since it was first revealed. He also dealt with many other Kabbalistic matters, but his main work, Eitz Chaim, reveals many of the details regarding creation up until the first verse of the Torah, often thought to be off limits. In a manner of speaking, Kabbalah is to the rest of Torah what quantum physics is to college physics. Even though both originate from the same source and explain the same creation, quantum physics is considerably more technical and significantly more complicated and abstract than physics on a college level. Likewise, the Kabbalah of Eitz Chaim is extremely abstract, possesses a language of its own, and is very technical. It is very different even from the parts of the Zohar that only provide a more Kabbalistic approach to the weekly Torah reading. It can take an entire lifetime to understand Kabbalah on this level, and then some. The primary focus of this aspect of Kabbalah is the Sefirot and Partsufim, completely spiritual. They comprise the system which God employed to make and maintain creation. Essentially, they filter the light of God to the point that it can actually result in creations, including man. At its source, the light of God, referred to as Or Ein Sof, the light without limit, or the infinite light, is far too spiritually intense for anything else to exist. To continually make creation possible, the Or Ein Sof must be reduced, filtered, so to speak, and the Sefirot, of which there are 10, and Partsufim, of which in general there are usually 5, are the mechanisms by which this occurs. The Sefirot will be discussed in more detail in a later session. In the meantime, the Kabbalistic interpretation of the verse of the Torah is as follows. The Sefira of Bina created the 6 points of Chesed, Givura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. This means that the Sefirot of Chesed through Yesod were the basis of the 6 days of creation. Each contained the spiritual potential to bring into existence what was created on its respective day. Not only were the Sefirot of Chesed through Yesod the basis of the 6 days of creation, they were also the basis of the corresponding millennia. It says, each day of creation alludes to 1,000 years of our existence, and every little detail that occurred on these days will have its corresponding event happen at the proportionate time during its millennium. This will be easier to appreciate in the session about the Sefirot. In the meantime, this has been an example of how a single verse from the Torah can be explained on 4 different levels of understanding. In fact, these 4 levels of Torah explanation correspond to the 4 main areas of Torah learning. The most basic area of Torah learning is the written verse itself, which can be read, for the most part, without explanation. After that is Mishnah, concise legal teachings that comprise the body of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. They were received together with the written law at Mount Sinai, which cannot be fully understood in detail without its companion, the oral law. Originally, the teachings of the Mishnah were memorized and discussed on an ongoing basis in the Beis Medrash, Torah study halls, to ensure continuity and accuracy. When persecution of Jews, especially Torah scholars, became intense during Roman times and threatened the ongoing accurate transmission of the oral law, it was codified and redacted. This occurred in 186 CE under the guidance of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. To maintain the integrity of the oral law, the Mishnah was recorded as terse and often incomplete statements. They are, for the most part, memory devices meant to assist those who have taken the time to learn the complete laws from a competent Torah educator. They hint to information by what they say, don't say, or how they say what they do, and therefore correspond to the level of Remez. The Talmud, learned in most yeshivas over the centuries, is the level of Derush. It was not recorded until 499 CE, when the Mishnah alone was no longer sufficient to ensure the veracity of the transmission of the oral law. The Jewish people not only suffered ongoing persecution, but exile and dispersion as well. This necessitated the recording of the discussions and explanations meant to be triggered by the Mishnah. The Talmud also contains many non-legal discussions called agadata, which are basically Talmudic midrashim. Most midrashim, also part of the oral tradition, are found outside of the Talmud in a collection of independent volumes. They often provide background information and details of stories in the Torah or lessons about life. The last and most sublime area of Torah learning is Kabbalah, introduced to the world in the Zohar and expanded upon in the teachings of the Rizal and many other Kabbalists since. As mentioned earlier, it is to this level of Torah learning that the topic of reincarnation belongs, as will become evident in the forthcoming sessions. B'ezras Hashem.